2018 was supposed to be the peak of aviation safety. Yet two brand new jets plunged into the sea just months apart, killing 346 people. Behind these disasters lay a hidden system, MCAS, a software fix linked to a single angle of attack sensor, buried by design choices and corporate pressure. How did the push to outpace a rival unleash catastrophe on the 737 MAX? And what else was kept from pilots in those final moments? The answer begins with a promise that seemed too good to question. In 2010, Airbus stunned the airline industry by launching the A320 Neo, boasting engines that promised up to 15% lower fuel consumption. Major carriers lined up, and Boeing felt the pressure almost overnight. Instead of designing an entirely new jet, Boeing made a strategic decision: re-engineer the existing 737 to compete and do it fast. This became the 737 MAX. The heart of the upgrade was the CFM LEAP 1B engine, a leap forward in efficiency, but also in size. The new engines were much larger in diameter than the previous CFM56 engines, and the classic 737 sat too low to the ground for them to fit in the same spot. Boeing's engineers moved the engines up and forward on the wing, creating enough clearance but also introducing a subtle aerodynamic change. At high angles of attack, the larger forward-mounted nacelles produced extra lift ahead of the wing, nudging the nose of the aircraft upward. This nose-up tendency was more than a quirk. It risked violating stability requirements and made the aircraft feel different from earlier 737s, a problem for both certification and Boeing's promise to airlines that pilots could fly the MAX with minimal retraining. Instead of changing the airframe or the wing, Boeing looked for a solution that would preserve the familiar 737 experience. The physical change was set. Now, the challenge was to manage the aircraft's new behavior without rewriting the rulebook for pilots or regulators. Boeing's commercial pitch for the 737 MAX centered on a single promise: pilots would not need expensive, time-consuming simulator training to move from previous 737 models to the MAX. Marketing materials and airline contracts said a simple differences course, often completed on a tablet, would be enough. That commitment shaped every major decision about what information was shared with airlines and crews. To preserve the appearance of continuity, Boeing classified new systems like MCAS as minor tweaks to existing flight controls rather than as standalone features. MCAS itself was designed to operate out of sight. It would activate only with flaps up, autopilot off, and at high angles of attack, conditions rarely encountered in routine flying. Its job was to nudge the nose down by moving the horizontal stabilizer, counteracting the pitch-up tendency created by the larger engines. The original MCAS logic relied on a single angle of attack sensor to determine when to activate. If that sensor reported a falsely high reading, would trigger nose-down trim commands even if the aircraft was flying normally. Each time the pilots used their electric trim switches to correct the nose position, MCAS would reset and, if the sensor still showed high angle of attack, command another round of nose-down trim. This cycle could repeat as long as the false reading persisted, creating a critical vulnerability. Because MCAS was categorized as a minor system, it received only a brief mention or none at all in flight crew manuals. Most pilots flying the MAX had no idea the system existed, let alone how it might behave if it malfunctioned. The software fix that was supposed to make the MAX feel familiar instead created a hidden hazard that would only become clear after tragedy. Lion Air's 737 MAX 8, tail number PKLQP, arrived in Jakarta after a string of unresolved technical issues. In the days before the crash, maintenance teams faced a series of air data faults, warnings about airspeed, altitude, and the stall management system. Engineers ran self-tests, reset circuit breakers, and cleared messages, but the problems kept returning. On October 27th, after yet another flight with warning lights and unreliable readings, a decision was made to replace the left angle of attack sensor. The replacement part came from a US repair station, Extra Aerospace, and it was labeled as serviceable. Later investigation revealed the sensor was miscalibrated by about 21 degrees before it even left the shop. A Lion Air technician installed the new sensor overnight, following the steps in the maintenance manual. The manual called for a post-installation system test, meant to catch any errors before the aircraft returned to service. According to the Indonesian accident report, that test was not fully performed or documented. The aircraft was cleared for flight with a faulty sensor, its paperwork signed off based on assumptions not evidence. Maintenance logs were incomplete, with pages missing and key details left out. No one caught the error. The next day, the jet flew a regular passenger leg with the same miscalibrated sensor, triggering cockpit warnings that were treated as isolated glitches. Each step in this chain, missed tests, rushed paperwork, a faulty part, left the aircraft one step closer to disaster. Within seconds of liftoff, Lion Air Flight JT610 cockpit filled with confusion. The captain's control column vibrated non-stop. The stick shaker had triggered and would not stop. On their screens, airspeed and altitude readings disagreed, forcing the pilots to cross-check every vital number. Just after the flaps retracted, an invisible system began its work. A miscalibrated angle of attack sensor, reading far too high, told the flight computer the jet was at risk of stalling. MCAS responded with a powerful nose-down command, moving the horizontal stabilizer for nearly 10 seconds. The pilots fought back, using their electric trim switches to pull the nose up. Each time they did, MCAS paused, then returned, pushing the nose down again. This cycle repeated over 20 times in less than 13 minutes. Inside the cockpit, stress mounted. The warning horn blared. The stick shaker rattled. The captain and first officer called out readings, tried to identify the source of the chaos, and worked through checklists. But the problem did not match anything in their training. The aircraft felt like it was fighting them, wanting to dive, as later described by pilots who studied the data. As the stabilizer crept further nose down, elevator control alone was no longer enough. The jet began to descend rapidly. At 6:32 a.m., after a final steep dive, flight JT610 struck the Java Sea, killing all 189 people on board. The evidence left behind told the story of a cockpit overwhelmed by warnings, locked in a losing struggle with a system they had never known existed. Within days of the Lion Air crash, Boeing and the FAA issued an emergency airworthiness directive. The bulletin stressed that pilots should use the existing runaway stabilizer procedure when facing uncommanded nose-down trim. Crews were instructed to hold the control column, cut off electric trim using the stab trim cutout switches, and trim manually. The guidance did not name MCAS, and it did not explain that a faulty angle of attack sensor could repeatedly trigger automatic nose-down commands. Another gap remained hidden. The 737 MAX cockpit could display an AOA disagree alert if its sensors disagreed, but that warning was only available when an airline had purchased an optional software package. Many jets flew without that option. As a result, most pilots had no clear cue that a sensor was feeding bad data to the flight computer. The official response closed one door, but it left another wide open. Ethiopian Airlines flight ET302 lifted off from Addis Ababa on a clear morning, carrying 157 people bound for Nairobi. Within moments, the captain's stick shaker activated and would not stop. Airspeed and altitude readings clashed. echoing the chaos seen in the Lion Air disaster just months earlier. The pilots pulled back, fighting the nose-down force. They worked through their checklists, quickly moving the stabilizer trim cutout switches to disable electric trim, exactly as the new guidance instructed. But as the aircraft accelerated, the forces on the manual trim wheel grew overwhelming. Investigators later measured these loads and found that at such high speeds and nose-down trim, turning the wheel required more strength than most crews could muster. In a desperate move, the crew re-enabled electric trim to regain control. MCAS, still reading a false high angle of attack, activated again. The jet plunged into the ground just 6 minutes after takeoff. All on board were lost. On March 13, 2019, the United States grounded the entire 737 MAX fleet, joining regulators across Europe, Asia, and Africa. The decision followed new flight data from Ethiopian Airlines ET302 that matched the fatal pattern seen in Lion Air JT610. FAA risk analysis showed the possibility of a similar crash every few years if nothing changed. Within hours, hundreds of aircraft sat idle at airports worldwide. Boeing faced a mandate to redesign MCAS before the MAX could fly again. The redesign required MCAS to compare both angle of attack sensors and to activate only if those sensors agreed. Any disagreement would trigger a cockpit alert and prevent MCAS from operating. The system's authority was capped. It could activate only once for each high angle of attack event. These changes aimed to close the gaps exposed by the crashes, removing the single point of failure and restoring confidence in the aircraft's safety. Today, every 737 MAX in the sky carries hard-won changes, yet the system that certified them remains under global scrutiny. Lives lost remind us. Aviation safety depends on unflinching transparency and relentless oversight. The next crisis will hinge on whether those lessons survive pressure, profit, and time. Share your thoughts below.